Welcome back to Telltale, another short story for a Tuesday. This time, I'm breaking with the Halloween stories just for a moment, just because there's this one story I really wanted to get to. It's a great story. It's pure science fiction, though. So, this one isn't Halloween, this one isn't horror, this one doesn't fit with October, but oh well, you'll love it. And the story is titled Rust. It's written by a little-known writer named Joseph E. Kelleam. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I've only seen it in print. He didn't write a lot of science fiction. He wrote his first science fiction story in the late 30s, published it in Astounding Stories in I believe it's October of 1939. And that story was titled Rust. It has been very well known. It has been anthologized a bit. So it's an acknowledged science fiction classic, and for good reasons. Now, I haven't read anything else by Kelleam yet. I'm going to read more and do an overview of Kelleam's work probably next year sometime. But I did read this one short story in this book, Great Science Fiction Stories, Volume 1, which covers 1939, edited by Asimov and Martin H. Greenberg. All the stories in this were chosen because Asimov and Greenberg felt they were the very best of 1939, and 1939 was the very first year of the Golden Age. And of course, Astounding was the magazine primarily responsible for starting the Golden Age. And Kelleam's story Rust appeared in Astounding. So what is the story about? The story is set in the far future. Mankind is dead. We've died off because man invented battle robots to kill the enemy. And eventually the battle robots got to where they just killed any human being they saw. And so they eventually wiped out all of humanity. Sounds a lot like the Terminator, right? But this was 1939, remember. So these robots are all still in existence, but they are not programmed to create anything. They are not programmed to repair anything. They're pretty advanced, pretty intelligent, and pretty much like human beings with feelings and a desire to keep going and a desire to create more of themselves, but they just don't have, well, for one thing, for hands, they have scissor claws that are meant to cut. And so they can't really do fine repair work on their bodies. And they're made out of steel, so they're rusting. Hence the title. They're all gradually rusting until they are no more. That's the situation of the story. The focus of the story is on 3 robots that, as far as they know, they're the only ones left. And their desire to keep going. They do attempt to create out of spare parts another robot like them. And they really want to keep going, and the story does a very, very good job of setting that stage of the end of the world, the end of intelligence on Earth. Man is gone, the robots have replaced him, the robots are dying out, there's nothing to take their place. So civilization and intelligence on planet Earth is coming to an end. And how do these robots feel about it? And they do have feelings. which also makes this story very reminiscent of Wall-E, except that there's no off-planet humans going to come and pick them up. But otherwise, their situation is very much like Wall-E's situation at the beginning of that movie. So you can see already two very, very big motion pictures which consciously or unconsciously are drawing upon this little story published in 1939. It's a very well told story. I think a very beautiful story. It's well written. The robots are well imagined. The place, I don't want to call it world building really, but the setting, the place, the situation, the time is very well built, which is essentially world building, but it's not like what authors are calling world building today. You don't get this whole elaborate, complicated world out of it. You just get this one place and time. But it's a fascinating place and time. And so this story has become a science fiction classic. It's an excellent story. It's a top tale for sure. I would encourage you to track it down. You should be able to find anthologies with it in. Otherwise, look up online. A lot of science fiction magazines are available as PDFs online, so you can find it that way and find the original issue of Astounding Science Fiction where this story appeared. I love the Paul Orban illustration that goes with it too. I used it for the title to this video. I think that's a beautiful illustration. So I would look it up. Let us know. Leave comments if you do. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you've already read it, what you think. If you have some others, like I mentioned 2 movies, I can't off the top of my head think of any other stories that follow these basic ideas presented in Rust. If you know of some, feel free to leave comments about it in the comments section on YouTube. I'd be very interested in knowing of more stories like this, because I love these far future, Earth is cooling down, the sun is cooling down, things are very different, kind of the end of mankind type stories. I find it fascinating. It's not because I have any desire for the world to end, but just I feel the setting can be so poetic and so beautifully described. I think it was very beautifully described in The Time Machine. I think it was very beautifully described here. I think it was beautifully described in Twilight and Night by John W. Campbell. Brian Evenson's book that I reviewed that takes place in the far, far future. I love those settings. I just think they are fascinating and imaginative and beautiful. So anyway, like us and subscribe to us. Come back again for more of this, us rambling about stories we read and liked. And I hope I know some people have learned some things from my videos. I've introduced them to stories that they didn't know about, and they've tried. And I've got at least a handful of people who are investigating older science fiction now because of these videos, and that's what I'm here for. Get you to wake up and see that all that fiction is out there, and it's really good. It's not moldy, it's not oldie, it's not so outdated that you can't read it. I mean, if you can read Wuthering Heights that was written in the early 1800s, you can read science fiction. I mean, yeah, some of the science becomes outstripped by our knowledge, but and that's the danger with writing science fiction. But otherwise, the stories, like I say, they're no more outdated than if you're reading something that was written in Victorian times. It's still very relevant, and still can be very beautiful stories, and I usually just approach them like they're, if they're too outdated science wise, I just read it like it's a fantasy story, and now it's okay. An alternate history or pure fantasy or whatever, and it comes across really nice. That's kind of the way you have to read Edgar Rice Burroughs. His Mars stories, of course, Mars is nothing like what he describes. So you have to read it like it's total fantasy, like you're reading about Pern or reading about Samaria or Middle Earth, other places that don't exist. And then it's perfectly readable. So that's all I got for this. To come back for more.